Good day, everyone. My name is Rich Chester. I'm the Director of Consulting for LPA Software Solutions, and I'm happy to be with you today to talk to you about this new capability in Cognos 10.2.2 called personal data sets. The agenda for today goes as follows. We're going to start off by talking about what these personal data sets are and what their value proposition may be for your organization. I'm then going to switch over to some slides that talk about what an end user would see and do to leverage this capability. And then I'll take a look at what an administrator would do to enable this capability, control access to this capability, and potentially limit the size of personal data set files that are uploaded by end users. I'll switch away from slides at that time. I'll go over to a virtual machine that I have set up, and that VM is enabled with 10.2.2, and I've also got a file of some time card data that I'll upload as a personal data set. I'll write a report using that personal data set using Cognos Workspace Advanced, and then I'm going to use that personal data set as well as some other data from other packages in a Cognos Workspace so that I can show you a couple of interesting things about working with your personal data in combination with the data that is centrally managed. And then finally, at the end, we'll hopefully have some time for some questions and answers. Throughout the presentation, if you would please submit any questions you have through the chat capability in the WebEx. I'll get to as many of those at the end of the session as I can. Never fear, any question you submit via the chat, we will gather up at the end and we'll respond via email with an answer to your question. So even if I don't get to it on the air, I will absolutely get to your question, and I look forward to getting through as many of those while we're together as I can. So let's go ahead and talk about personal data sets and their value proposition. And I'm going to start that conversation by talking about a concept that Gartner recently introduced called bimodal business intelligence. And the notion behind bimodal business intelligence goes something like this. Business intelligence implementations really sort of have two personalities. And for a lot of us, maybe the personality we're most familiar with is what I would call the traditional centralized business intelligence world. That is where we have our corporate data assets that are highly managed, a business intelligence platform, Cognos Business Intelligence, that lets us write reports and do analyses against those managed data sets. And those platforms, rock solid, high degree of availability, single version of the truth for everybody kinds of platforms, those are what a lot of us have invested in up until now. And it is an absolutely necessary part of any business intelligence infrastructure that you have at your corporation. But the other side of this bimodal notion, where we have two personalities of our business intelligence, is the end user side, specifically empowering your end users to be self-directed in terms of data discovery and exploration, but not just of the centrally managed, stable, single version of the truth data. That's important, but that's not what it's limited to. In addition, Bimodal BI sort of sets the stage for end users having capabilities in the business intelligence platform in your company to access data in addition to the centrally managed data sets. So data, for example, that I might have in a spreadsheet or in a CSV that I might have received from the outside that I want to write reports or analyses against. Perhaps this is data that I picked up off of the web that I want to be able to write a report against and use and leverage to answer questions and help me do my job better. So this end user empowerment, this self-directed data discovery and exploration capability, that's part of this notion of bimodal BI, that is where I believe we're going to find a lot of innovation over the next multiple releases in Cognos Business Intelligence. It's about empowering end users to be able to do with the business intelligence those things they need to do on the data sets, both the managed and the external to the managed, that enable them to answer questions, make better decisions faster, and without the need for information technology involvement. And one of the very first capabilities that Cognos BI has introduced that sort of gets us more and more toward this bimodal BI notion are personal data sets. So personal data sets allow my end users to create and share business intelligence objects, reports, analyses, dashboards, workspaces, with their own personal data. Now, in this release, the supported data is a CSV file, an Excel file, XLS, so that would be like Excel 2002 and before, I think, and a compressed Excel file, XLSX files. That'd be like Excel 2007 and later files. So CSV and Excel files are the formats that um, are supported by the personal data sets in this release 10.2.2. You upload those files. You click a browse button, you upload them. Cognos interprets them and then allows you to set some simple properties on them to help control some behavior that happens in reports, like which columns should I include. Maybe I've got 100 columns in my spreadsheet, but I only want 25 of them available for reporting. Stuff like that. I'll show you an example of that for sure. Once you've got your data set uploaded and that simple metadata, what columns to include, and a couple of other things, you can publish a package. Store that package in your My folders, store that package in the public folders, and then write reports against it, just like any other package of data that you've written reports against with Cognos Workspace Advanced or Report Studio to enable you to write the reports against the personal data you've just uploaded and get the value out of that personal data and value out of your business intelligence assets. And you don't need the IT department to get in the middle of any of this. Once the personal data sets capability has been set up and granted to you, you can just go. You don't need to have intervention centrally to create your data sets and create reports from those data sets. So let's take a look at how this would work from an end user perspective in slides. And then again, I'm going to give a demo of how this works when it comes to the demonstration part after the slides. So when I log into the Cognos connection, I've always had this area. It's called the My Area options, and in it, it's where I go to set my preferences. Right, I might set my default report format. I might set the number of rows before I hit page down on the Cognos connection. I might turn on alternating backgrounds. In that same area, once I click this little guy here next to the launch, there's this new thing called My Data Sets. So if your administrator is giving you access to this capability, that entry will be there. When you click on it for the very first time, you'll come to this screen, which will be empty. But normally, after you've been using personal data sets, all of your personal data sets will be listed here. To create a new data set, you would click on this button up here. And when you do that, up will pop this dialog. And the first thing you'll do is you'll browse to the file you'd like to upload. Excel CSV. When you upload it, Cognos will present you with the metadata. This is the columns and the data types and this thing called the default summary on the left. It'll also give you a sample of the data that it read on the right. Your job now is to update this metadata, and there's only 2 updates you can do, to tell Cognos what to do with this data when it writes reports. The first thing is over here on the left. On the left, you see that by default, all of the columns in my uploaded file have been checked. Perhaps I don't want to include the employee ID, or I don't want to include the task number. Well, I can uncheck those guys, and then the data set will not include those columns. So that's one, let's call that a very simple metadata example. The, in my opinion, more important metadata to get right is over here under default summary. So when Cognos reads your data and it determines the data types, any data that is numeric, like a year, like a work ID, like the number of hours spent, it assumes you would like to total up as though it's a measurement of some kind. Well, in the case of what I'm showing here on the screen and what I'll show you in my example, work ID, project ID, employee ID, even though they're integers, they're not measurements. They're not something I want to total up. So the default is total those guys up because they're numerics. I need to change that on those where totaling it up makes no sense. And essentially tell Cognos to treat that integer as a text string. So in my example here, I don't want to total up years. I don't want to total up tasks. I do want this hours spent column to actually be treated as a measure. That's the measure in the personal data set that's shown here. And I'll be uploading this same personal data set when I do the demonstration. So you set the default summary to make sure that the default summary happens. And do note that summarizing with a total is not the only option. If this is a measure and you want to summarize it so you get an average when you put it on a report as the default, or perhaps the maximum value or the minimum value, or even a count. Now, count you would apply to maybe like the work ID or the project ID more than you would maybe to hours. But the notion here is that there's multiple summaries you can pick. None means treat it like text. Some means total. I think that's probably the one that most people will use most often, and that is the default. But you have these other options that you should be aware of. So set the columns I want, set the summaries I need, and now I'm done. Now I'm ready to make this data available for reporting. And that's done by clicking on the Publish button. When I click on the Publish button, Cognos presents me with a dialog that will let me determine where I'm going to publish the package. Now, where I publish the package, to a certain extent, dictates the security of my personal data set. In other words, if I publish it into my folders, the data that's available through that package is only available to me because I'm the only one that can get at my folders. So to create a report from that package, I have to have access to that package. To run a report that uses that package, I have to have access to that package. So if the package is in my folders, only I can write reports and only I can run reports, even if those reports were saved to the public folder. Because as soon as anyone else tried to run them, it would try to hit the package in my folders, and that's not allowed. So the my folders publish very, very private data. My personal data sets are truly personal. They are strictly me in terms of use. On the other hand, I might publish to a folder in the public folders. And when I publish to a folder, by default, my package inherits the security of the folder. So if I have access to write to a folder, and 3 people in my organization also have access to that folder, then those 3 people plus me would be able to leverage my personal data set in reports. And I can control that even further. I can always override that inheritance from the folder. And we can talk about that a little bit later when I talk about administration. And I can show you that too in my demonstration if there's time. Once I've published my package, I use it like any other package I use. My data warehouse package, I write reports against it. My personal data sets package, I write reports against it. So you can see here I'm using Cognos Workspace Advanced. Over here is the metadata. These are the columns that I uploaded in my personal data set. I drag them and drop them into, in this case, a crosstab, and it works just like any other report that I'm writing from any other package. Now let's flip over to the administrator side. Let's say, okay, so the administrator has to enable this capability, needs to be able to manage the personal data sets potentially, and also may need to limit the size of the files that are uploaded. So let's take a look at all of those sorts of things. First of all, this one's really very straightforward in terms of how does the administrator manage the personal data sets? Well, they come to the administration portion of the Cognos connection. On the status bar, they click on data sets, and here will be listed all of the data sets, who owns them, the last time that they were updated, and what their size is. So the administrator will have access to view and potentially delete any uploaded data sets in the environment. So the administrator has access to manage them. The notion here is that they also will know who owns them, so they can also contact those folks if they have any questions. They also understand the size they're taking up, so they know how much room they're taking up in the database they're stored in. And that's an important point. They are stored in a database. That database is referred to as a data set repository. And the way you enable people to upload files into the repository is by first, as the administrator, going to configuration data source connections and creating a data source called whatever you want to call it that will play the part of the repository. So when you create the data source and you go through the wizard, one of the options after you've given it a name, and it can be any name, I just happen to name mine my data sets repository to make it real obvious for this conversation. But there is a an entry in the dropdown of the data source type that is a My Datasets repository. When you click that, it gives you some defaults. It is always a JDBC connection. It is always a DB2 database. Even if it says InfoSphere Big Insights up here, like mine does, it is DB2, as you can see from the JDBC URL. It's a DB2 or a DB2 with blue acceleration database that is the target when I upload a file. Now, it's sort of funny to think of that as a data source in the traditional Cognos sense, and that data sources are things we read, not things we write to. But in the case of a dataset repository, not only do I use that when I run a report to read the data from, when I upload data, whether that's new data or data to refresh a previously uploaded data set, right? It is writing to that repository. So this is both a read and a write data source, one of the few of those that are in the Cognos BI world. So you create the repository. Now, it's possible to create more than one repository. And the reason you might do that is if you want to segregate the uploads from groups of users. So you might have a database for each tenant if you have a multi-tenanted Cognos environment. You might have a specific reason to spread the load across multiple databases. And so you'd create repositories pointing to different instances of DB2. And then you would assign by security access to a repository to a group of users. So if I log in and I have access to one and only one repository in a list of repositories, then when I upload, Cognos doesn't ask me which repository to store it in. It just stores it in the one that I have access to. On the other hand, if I have access to multiple dataset repositories, Cognos will prompt me, which dataset repository would you like to store this upload in, so that I would have the choice. Most users in my experience, and remember this is sort of new, so experience with this in the field is sort of limited. But in my experience so far, people have one repository. I haven't seen people going for multiples yet. But I could envision a desire to segregate data by user community coming up from time to time, especially in a multi-tenanted environment. And there you might want to create multiple data sets. Again, not the end user view, guys, right? This is the administrator view. So the administrator will make these decisions up front before they enable any end users to move forward with the data sets. So have to first create a repository for anybody to be able to use these data sets. And you do that through the configuration data source connections area. Now, in 10.2.2, in the list of capabilities under the security tab, there is this new capability called My Datasets. And in order to control who has the My Datasets dropdown in their user area, you need to set the properties on this capability so that it lists only the subset of users you wish to have the capability. So default, everyone has access to My Datasets. If there is a dataset repository defined, everybody will have My Datasets in their dropdown, in their user area. If you wish to change that so that it is not available to everyone who logs in, you would need to update these permissions. The best practice in terms of assigning access to a capability is to assign users or groups of users to roles here in the users, groups, and roles area, and then assign those roles to the capabilities they should inherit. So if you wanted to give access to all of your authors or all of your Cognos Express authors, if you wanted to also give them access to My Datasets, you could easily do that by adding those roles to this list. Remove the everyone, and then people who are not members of those roles will not have My Datasets. If you've done security for Cognos in the past, it's no different with this capability than it is for any other capability. So I need a repository before I can enable this for my end users. I need to control access. Otherwise, by default, everybody will have access to this capability, which is something you should think about and not just let happen. But maybe it's appropriate for everyone. Maybe it's appropriate for a subset of everyone. You would control access to the capability here. And then you need to think about, do I want to limit the size of individual files that my users can upload, or do I want to limit the total that any one user could upload? If you want to do either of those limits, you can, and you do that through the configuration tab. You go to the dispatchers and services, and you'll get to a list of dispatchers. Now, you can set these limits on a dispatcher by dispatcher basis, but that would not be a best practice. It is far better to set these parameters for all dispatchers here in this property sheet rather than here on a dispatcher by dispatcher basis with this property sheet. Many of you will have a single Cognos install, a single server install, and therefore there will only ever be one dispatcher. Some folks, though, on the webinar will have a multi-server install, and it's especially important when you have a multi-server install to do it these settings at this global property sheet, not the property sheet of any one dispatcher. And so that's just a good best practice regardless of the number of dispatchers you have. When you click on that property sheet button, you'll get this screen. When you click on settings, the very first setting will be this environment advanced settings entry. And you'll click this edit link to get to this screen where you actually enter some limits on the uploaded files. So what are those limits? Well, there are three types of limits you can set. The first type is the maximum file size for any one file that is a CSV format or an XLS format. And the default value for that is 100,000 kilobytes. So what I'm showing you here is the defaults. If those defaults are fine, you need not do any settings. So I'm showing you the defaults, but there's no reason for you to come in here and set these numbers this way because they're the defaults. But if you wanted to set that to a higher or lower value, this is how you would do it. You would enter this mdsrb dot datasets max file size per import kb, and that will, you put a value in of the number of kilobytes, and that will be enforced whenever a user uploads an uncompressed file, which in the case of what's supported is CSVs and XLS files. Now, if you want to do that limitation, but you want to do it on a tenant by tenant basis, some tenants might have larger files they can upload, some tenants might set the smaller files they can upload, well then suffix this directive here with an underscore and then the tenant ID of the tenant you'd like to manage. So if you will, this is a global setting across everybody in the environment. This is a setting for, in this case, the tenant whose ID is tenant 1. So you can suffix any of these three governors with a tenant ID if you want to get a tenant-specific value for these limiters. So first limiter, uncompressed file uploads. Second limiter is for each file that you upload that is an XLSX format. And that's defaults to 3,000 kilobytes. Now the reason this is separate is because XLSX is a compressed format. So think about it sort of like this. What I can fit in a 300 kilobyte XLSX file, like Excel 2007 or newer, is equivalent to what I could fit in a 100,000 kilobyte CSV file. Because they're vastly different, one of them is compressed and the other ones aren't, Cognos chose to give us two governors because 1,000 kilobytes of compressed is a lot more data than 1,000 kilobytes of uncompressed. So I have those two limiters there. This has to do with individual files that are uploaded. That's different than this third one. This third one is, for any one user, what is the total size of all the files they've uploaded? And that also defaults to 100,000 kilobytes. So in the default world, if I have two CSVs of 50,000 kilobytes each, when I try to upload a third file, it will be denied because I will have exceeded my total of 100,000 kilobytes. You with me? So I can mix and match files up to 100,000 kilobytes. Individually, they have to meet the first two delimiters, and in total, they have to be under the last limiter. So the administrator can set these controls. Now, you can set these anytime. It doesn't require a Cognos restart. They'll take effect in approximately a minute. These advanced settings in general, when you put them in, unless it's specifically documented that you must restart for them to take hold, they'll generally take hold within a minute. For the administrators who happen to be on the webinar, in the administrator user guide, which is UG_CRA, if you look at the PDF, Chapter 25 deals with personal data sets and describes these governors and what their default values are. So the administrator has created a repository, one or more, usually one so far in my experience, but it hasn't been out for that long. They will have granted access to that repository to a collection of users. They will have granted access to the data set's capability under the capabilities folder. They may or may not have set different limits than the default limits. Once they've done that, end users can start to leverage this personal data set's capability, upload data sets, set their metadata, and publish them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a demonstration of how all of that works as an end user. So I'm going to go over to my virtual machine here. And I'm going to log into Cognos. I'll go to my home. Up here, this is the My Area options I was talking about. When I click on that, My Data Sets is here. So I'll go ahead and select it. I have no personal data sets defined yet. So to get started, I click on this Import Data button. I'm going to navigate to a file that I have on my desktop. I happen to have it in two formats. I happen to have it in an XLSX format, which is just under my 3,000 kilobyte limit. And I also have this 4.5 megabyte CSV file. I'm going to go ahead and grab that CSV file. Now what Cognos is doing is it's bringing that file to the server. It's reading that file to understand the columns. Very important that the first row in the CSV or in the Excel is the column names. It's going to determine the data types based on sampling the data, and then it's going to put some default summaries together. Over here there is a view of what the data looks like that I saw. It's not all the rows, it's something on the order of the first 25 rows. But it gives me a notion of what's there. There's my date and my year and so on. Over here, the assumption that Cognos has made is that every column in my spreadsheet is a column I'd like to include in my package and make available for reporting. If that's not true, I can just uncheck the ones I don't want. Now, once I've gotten to the subset of columns that I want in my package, I have to look at this default summary. And here's an example with work ID and project ID, where they are integer values, and Cognos immediately assumed, hey, these are integers, he probably wants a total amount. But work ID and project ID are not things that I would total. It doesn't make business sense. So I'm going to update the default summary to none. When I take a numeric and set its default summary to none, that tells Cognos to treat it as though it were a text string and not a number. Employee ID I would normally change, but I'm not going to include it, so it's not critical that I change it. Hours spent, now this is the actual measure for this data. This is timesheet data for 2012 and 2013 that I extracted from our timekeeping system for purposes of this example. And that is my measure. That is the thing that I do want to total up when I put it on reports. Remember, though, I'm not limited to total. I can do averages or mins or maxes, but total is by far the most common thing to do with a measure in my experience, and that is the default, which makes perfect sense for hours. Again, I could update my task number, but since I'm not including it anyway, it's not critical. But year, I do want to make sure that I don't total up my years when I put them on a report. So my metadata settings done. That is all I need to do to ensure the right behavior on my numerics. I'm ready to create a package to access this data in a report, and I do that by clicking Publish. So when I click Publish, here's where I make my first security decision. If I publish to my folders, then I and only I can write reports or run reports that use this personal data set. On the other hand, if I publish it in the public folders, I could make this available to multiple colleagues, if that makes sense for this data. I'm going to go ahead and publish it in the public folders in a folder cleverly named personal data sets. The folder name is clearly not important. It's just for purposes of this particular demo, I created that folder. Now you see in my list of data sets, I have a data set. Now if I were going to go ahead and update the data set, I would click over here and it will bring me right back here. It'll show me the data that's been updated. It'll show me the metadata. So here I could change that metadata. If I do remember, I've got to publish again. But this is also where I would go ahead and put in an updated file. So if I uploaded my data, right, set my metadata, I'm writing reports, I change my file, right? Well, Cognos won't know about that change. It's sitting on my PC. I have to upload it again. So I come in here, browse to that file, upload it. Cognos will replace the old data set with the contents of the file. This is not an append. It is a full-on replace. So do make sure that your data set is complete when you upload it. It's not just the new records or just the changed records. It's a wholesale replace of the data I previously uploaded. It will look at the spreadsheet or CSV layout, and it'll say, 2 columns have been deleted, 3 columns have been added, and it'll tell me that. Now, when I see that, if that's not what I meant, maybe I navigated to the wrong file, I can stop it right there. But it's a nice feature that it auto detects those changes, so that I know that I've got new metadata. I know that if I did delete or add columns at son of a gun, here they are. They came in. It's a great little reminder. But the way to update a personal data set is to come in here and browse to the file. And once I browse to the file, it will update the file and replace the data that was there before. The metadata is not replaced. If the column is deleted, the metadata is removed for that column. New columns come in here and I manage the metadata on them before I publish. But I have published. Now, I can come to this list of data sets right through my data sets. Notice it's not here because I'm already there. If I want to get to the package, I can just click right on the package. There's a hyperlink to the package. See how it jumped me to the place I published it? It actually jumped me right inside of the folder that the package represents. So I could go there. I could navigate there just by hand like this. And I can also navigate there when I launch a report writing tool like Cognos Workspace Advanced, just the way I do for any other package that I access. So regardless of how I select the package to write my report, I bring up Cognos Workspace Advanced. I'll create a new report. In this case, I know it's not a Cognos Workspace Advanced webinar, so I'll go quickly through and create a chart. I want to create a report and I want to save it because I want to show you something with Cognos Workspace and this report as part of this demonstration. So I'm going to create a column chart with my personal data set data. This is time data. Over here, when I expand it, you see I have one query subject. The query items exactly match the metadata that I specified. The ones I unchecked are not here. The only real measure is hours spent. Everything else is an attribute and won't auto total. I'm going to go ahead and create a chart that shows years and states and hours on timesheets for those years and states. I'm going to limit my states to the states in the Northeast, let's suppose. That would be, let's go with Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, probably good Northeast states. So there, just like any other report I've ever written, just like any other chart I've ever created from a package, nothing's different in terms of writing a report. It's a package of data, and I write a report against the package. You with me? So I'm going to go ahead and save this guy so I can use him in a workspace. I'll drop him in the public folders. I'll just put him in this same place here. And this is going to be hours by year and state is the name of my report. And there you go. So uploaded my file, set my metadata, published my package, write 1 or n reports against that package. That's the personal data set story from an end user perspective in a nutshell. What I'm going to do, though, is in anticipation of a question you might have, I'm going to use Cognos Workspace. And what I'm going to do in Workspace is create a new workspace and put data on it from my personal data sets as well as from my centrally managed data warehouse. So let me launch Cognos Workspace and create a new workspace. And I'm going to navigate and drop my chart from my hours by year and state onto my workspace here. And I'm also going to navigate to a report that I wrote from the sample data, a revenue by year. So this is represents my centrally managed BI. Data assets that the IT department has managed. It's a data warehouse that's updated every night, that sort of thing. And I'm going to drop a chart on. This was written from a different package with different data. Has nothing to do with my personal data set. And I'm going to resize this guy just so he lines up nicely with that guy. And then I will drop a cross tab on and pop that over here, align to there. So here I've got personal data intermingled with corporate data. So that was sort of part one of a question I thought you might have, which is, all right, Rich, you know, I can only write a report from a single package. So this report could only come from my time data. But I want it to be presented with data from my corporate assets. Can I do that? Well, the answer is, well, sure. Cognos Workspace doesn't care what package each individual widget comes from. It can present those widgets on the same workspace. So that's a way where you can combine this data with your assets. Now, the other thing that Cognos 10.2.2 introduced, so this is sort of a bonus Cognos Workspace enhancement that I'm going to show you now, is something called master filtering. So if you've used Workspace before, you might notice this button here, which is new, that's available in 10.2.2 only. If I click on it, what it does is it makes this widget a master filter widget. And how master filters work is that when I click on a year value or a state value, any other widget that contains an identically named column, like year, will auto-filter to the value I click. Let me show you what I mean by that. So this is my master filter. And by the way, I could have made any one of these my master filter. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to also make this guy a master filter. Okay? It's nothing to do with the personal data set. This is independent of that. But this is a way for my personal data set widget and my corporate data set widgets to interact. Let me show you what I mean. This guy is a master filter. When I click on 2012, notice that both of my other two widgets, built from an entirely different package, automatically update and filter to 2012. Why did that happen? Because when I uploaded this guy, I made sure to name my year capital Y-E-A-R, knowing that in my data warehouse, the column was exactly named that as well, capital Y-E-A-R. And I'm emphasizing capital Y because case matters. So this guy's data was called year, this guy's data was called year. Master filters say, like named data items can be filtered across packages in a Cognos workspace. That's new in 10.2.2. This guy I made a master filter as well, right? So if I go to 2012 and 2013 over here, both of these update. Since this is a master filter, if I click on 2012 over here, it's also going to filter. So again, the master filter has nothing to do with the package that the widget was written in terms of turning it on or off for a widget. It's a matter of when I turn it on any widget, like named data items that are visible in those widgets can be used to filter the other widgets. So not only now do I have a workspace that shows my personal data set with some corporate data, I can also have my personal data set impact the data sets in the other widgets by virtue of cleverly naming my columns. Okay, and this also applies if I were to create a filter here. So if I grab a value filter, actually let me expand my global area first and then drop a value filter over here. You see that if I selected year here and used the filter, all three are going to be filtered, all three widgets. Same reason. The column name is identical in both packages. Therefore, Cognos knows that it can filter it. Now, you might say, gee, Rich, in one of them it's a 2-digit year, and the other one it's a 4-digit year. How's that going to work? And I would respond, well, just like you suspect, that won't work. The data has to be identical. Right? In my corporate data, I have data from 2010 and 2011. I don't have that data in my personal data set. So if I filter to those two values, my personal data set will be empty. If I have, if I were doing this with a product line kind of thing, and in my personal data set, instead of camping equipment, I had CE. Well, CE and camping equipment are never going to match. So my corporate data says camping equipment, my personal data says CE. It's not going to help me. So it's important, if I'm going to leverage my personal data set with my corporate data set, that I have a little bit of knowledge, a little savvy to make sure that my data values will match up and my names of my columns exactly match. Doing both of those enables me to have this behavior in Cognos Workspace, this master filter behavior, which is a 10.2.2 behavior, or this select value filter, which is actually available before 10.2.2. Okay, so I wanted to show you the Cognos Workspace thing because I thought that you would ask about combining the corporate data and the master data. Now, you might say to me, Rich, that's good, but what if I wanted to put my corporate data and my time data in one chart? That is not supported by a personal data set. That's the notion of a personal data set is that it is a standalone package. If you have a data set like an Excel or a CSV that you need to combine with the data assets that are in other packages, there is a capability that's been around and for multiple releases called external data that you could leverage. We did do a webinar on external data in the past. If you would like to view that webinar and understand that use of external data, you can go to lpa.com/events and you can look for our external data webinar. But personal data sets are not, let me create one package with both my spreadsheet and my centrally managed assets in a single package. That's external data. Personal data sets are, let me create a standalone package of my data set and create BI from it. And then I would be able to interact across packages in a Cognos workspace with filters or with master filters. All right. The only other thing I want to show you is if I update my data. So I could update my CSV, and I'll just do that quickly. I am going to make a massive change to this number. I'm going to put a very large number of hours there so we can instantly see a big change in the data for that year, which is, let's see, it's over here on the right. So that would be 2012 looks like. Okay, so I've made a change to my data. Of course, my personal data set hasn't changed because I made the change in my source data, right? So now I'm going to update my personal data set. So I want to go through that with you just so there's some clarity there. So I log on, I go to my data sets. I want to update this existing data set. So I click on my Edit Data Set button. It shows me what it has. And I believe this is the row I changed. I guess we'll find out. I will browse to my source file. Grab that CSV. It's now going to, there's no metadata changes. That means it said, oh look, no new columns, no deleted columns. I do want to proceed. And there's my updated data. So that's how I update my data. I have to come in after I have created a new data set, and I come in and I replace the old data set with the new. So I couldn't have just had an upload of one row with this change, because then all I'd end up with is one row. Right? Because it's a replacement of the previously uploaded data set. I don't have to publish because the metadata hasn't changed. I just have to close. And you see, the upload saves the data, right? It's not the publish that saves the data. As soon as I upload, it replaced the data. When I said yes to do you want to proceed, it went ahead and replaced the data. So there's no save notion here for the updated data. If I changed this to from sum to average, I would need to republish because I changed the metadata. Metadata change, have to republish. Just a data change, no need to republish. Upload the data, hit close, go run your report. Your report will run with the new data. So if I come in here and run this report, I should see a vastly large number in 2012 because I put in such a huge number. So you see it's running with the new data. So that is my demonstration of personal data sets in both creating them, reporting on them, and using them in Cognos Workspace. So I'll take some of the questions that you've no doubt been submitting as we talked. So the first question that I've got here is, what delimiters can I use in a CSV? So CSV, comma separated values, certainly commas work. You saw that in my file that I just edited. It was commas. You can also use tabs, semicolons, or the pipe character to separate columns. Next question. My data files could be quite large. Can I zip the file and upload it, or do I have to upload an unzipped version? Wow, hey, great question, first of all. And I actually know the answer. So I read through the documentation in preparation for this webinar, and it turns out that in the documentation it says that you can upload a zip file of your CSV or XLS or XLSX file. So you drop that file in a zip, you upload the zip, and the reason in the documentation it says you might do that is specifically because the size and therefore the time it would take to upload. If you upload it zipped, it will upload faster. Cognos will essentially unzip it and drop the resulting data into the repository for you. So if you've got a very large file and your administrator has enabled you to upload very large files, right, then you could upload it in a .zip format. One file per zip. Don't try to put multiple files in the zip. And it will actually go up, and Cognos will unzip it and put the data into the repository. Is the personal data set exported when I do a content store export? So for the administrators on the phone, you know that we often schedule content store exports to back up our BI assets, reports, packages, stored outputs, and the repository, the data that I've uploaded in my data sets, is not stored in the Cognos content store. It's stored in a separate repository. And therefore, when I export the content store, it will not export my data. It will certainly export my packages, and the reports I've written, any stored outputs from those reports will be in that export. But exporting the data itself would not be part of the content store export. How do I back up personal data that's been uploaded? Well, it's a DB2 database that it's living in, either DB2 or DB2 with Blue Acceleration. And therefore, it's up to me as the administrator to work with my DBA, once we've created the repository database in DB2, to have a maintenance plan for that database so that it is routinely backed up. That way, if there is a database issue, I can restore the personal data sets to the last backup. So there's no Cognos backup that saves the data set data. All the reports, yes. The package, yes. Any stored outputs, yes. But the data itself, that's up to a database backup for disaster recovery. Great question. The next question is, what happens if an Excel file has multiple tabs? Tested this myself. The first tab is what is used by the personal data sets uploader. It doesn't prompt you for, hey, what tab would you like? I think that could be a good thing. Let's suppose that I have a bunch of work I'm doing to actually generate the data that I want to upload. So maybe I have 5 tabs in my spreadsheet. The first tab is the result of what the other 4 tabs have calculated, right? And so when I upload it, I don't have to have a separate copy of that spreadsheet with all of those other tabs in it because they get in the way, let's suppose. Instead, no Cognos will take the first tab, results, and upload them and ignore the other 4 tabs. So I can have a spreadsheet with a bunch of work to get to my data tab. And as long as my data tab is my first tab, I can then upload that spreadsheet to Cognos to store in the repository. Okay. And the last question that I have time for, I'm afraid, is this one. Are personal data sets supported for any other database besides DB2? The short answer is no. So in the 10.2.2 release, where they introduced this feature, they're very clear and explicit that this is a DB2 and a DB2 with blue supported databases only. I would hope, but I don't know for sure because I don't work for IBM, I work for LPA Software Solutions. But I would hope that there would be support for multiple databases in a future release. I have no insight into if or when that would happen. So I guess for right now, the answer we should all expect and then be delighted if it changes is DB2 is the database repository that is supported for personal data sets, either DB2 or DB2 with blue acceleration. All right. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar today. I hope that I've given you some valuable insights into how personal data sets work, and also maybe some thing to think about in terms of this whole notion of bimodal BI. Never fear any questions that I didn't get to, and it looks like there are several. I will respond to after the webinar, so you'll get an email from one of the folks here at LPA with an answer to your questions. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to chatting with you again on a future webinar. Thanks so much.